The silence of deep space had been Earth's constant companion for decades. The void stretched endlessly, untouched by human hands. But something had changed. In the heart of the solar system, the Elysium, Earth's foremost deep space observatory, had been monitoring the quiet hum of distant stars when, suddenly, a signal broke through. It wasn't like any signal they had ever encountered. At first, it was a faint, almost imperceptible burst, a simple rhythm, repeating every minute, a pulse that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the cosmos. Dr. Lena Carter, the lead scientist at Elysium, leaned forward in her chair, eyes narrowed at the data display in front of her. The signal was clear, too clear for any natural anomaly. She'd worked with her team for years on deep space scans, analyzing cosmic radiation and solar winds, but nothing had ever presented itself like this. "Bring up the frequency graph," Lena instructed, her voice tight with both excitement and suspicion. Her fingers hovered over the touchscreen, zooming in on the odd pulse. It wasn't the random static of distant stars, nor was it some natural phenomenon. This was deliberate, calculated. "Can you isolate it, Dr. Carter?" one of her colleagues, Dr. Joshua Reed, asked, his voice betraying the same sense of curiosity that filled the room. His eyes never left the screen, even as the other team members scrambled to adjust the instruments. With a few swift motions, Lena enhanced the signal's clarity. The rhythm was unmistakable, a pattern, repeating with a precision that could only have been constructed by an intelligent mind. It was a message, a call. "Where is it coming from?" Lena whispered, almost to herself. "Coordinates received. It's coming from the edge of the galaxy," Joshua said, his fingers tapping rapidly across his console as he ran the calculations. "But that's impossible. It's a place where we thought there was nothing, no star systems, no habitable planets." The crew exchanged glances, their excitement growing into disbelief. How could such a signal have been sent from an empty part of the galaxy? A part that hadn't seen a human presence in over 100 years? Could this be some kind of error? Lena asked, though her voice lacked conviction. A nagging feeling tugged at her mind. This was no accident. "Let's cross-check," Joshua replied. "I'll run a full scan of all known frequencies, any interference from known objects in that area. It could be something we missed." Minutes stretched into an eternity as the team worked feverishly, isolating every variable, considering every possibility. But the signal persisted, unwavering and undeniable. Lena turned to the main console, her mind racing with theories. "What if this is a distress call?" she said slowly. "Not from an alien species, but from something else." Joshua's face paled as he caught her meaning. "Are you saying this is a signal from the Lost Fleet, the one Earth sent out during the early years of space exploration?" It had been a legend, a myth, tales of the early human explorers who ventured into the unknown, only to vanish without a trace. The fleet was lost to time, its fate never known. But now, here was this signal, echoing from the depths of space. Could it be real? Lena's heart pounded in her chest. The implications were staggering. The signal wasn't just a message, it was a call from the past. A plea for help. And if it was the fleet, if it was truly them, they had been waiting for centuries. "Prepare to send a response," Lena ordered, her voice firm. "We need to reach them before anyone else does. If this is Earth's lost fleet, we can't afford to let whatever this is fall into the wrong hands." As the team scrambled to respond, Lena felt a chill run down her spine. This was no longer just about science. It was about uncovering the truth of humanity's forgotten legacy. The signal was their only link to what was lost in the stars, and it could either be a message of hope or a harbinger of disaster. And deep in the darkness of space, the fleet, long thought lost, listened. The Vanguard glided silently through the void, a relic of a forgotten era, its hull reflecting the faint light of distant stars. Captain Elara Ward stood at the command console, her hands steady but her mind racing. It had been years since she'd felt this uneasy, Years since she'd even considered Earth, the homeworld she and her crew had once called their own. Now, however, the signal, Earth's long-forgotten call, had reached them, and it felt like an echo from a past that should have stayed buried. Ilara's eyes scanned the view screen. The cold, indifferent expanse of space stretched before them, endless and unyielding. The fleet, the last remnant of humanity's earliest interstellar ventures, had been wandering the outer rim for generations. They had long since outgrown their need for Earth, surviving through ingenuity and sheer willpower. But now, after centuries of silence, the ancient signal had reignited memories of a long-lost mission and a terrifying truth that had been buried by time. "Captain," Lieutenant Mara Singh's voice broke through the silence, her tone laced with unease. "The signal source has been traced to a region within the Xorth-controlled sector. You know what that means." Ilara nodded solemnly. The Xorth, a ruthless, technologically superior alien species, they had long been humanity's greatest enemy. They had wiped out entire colonies, and their presence in the galaxy was a constant threat. The idea that Earth's lost fleet had been hiding in Xorth space for all these years sent a shiver down Ilara's spine. "Prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers," Ilara ordered. "We don't know what we're walking into, but we're not taking any chances." The crew of the Vanguard sprang into action, their movements practiced and precise. Ilara's mind raced as she considered the implications of the signal. If the fleet had survived all this time, it was likely a mix of both hope and desperation. Had they become a shadow of their former selves, or had they become something else entirely, something more dangerous? "Captain, we have a problem." Mara's voice interrupted her thoughts. "There's a fleet ahead of us. It's enormous, far larger than anything we've ever seen. They're waiting for us." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. "They're here." "Can you identify them?" Ilara asked, trying to remain composed. "They're not human," Mara replied. "Xorth, and they know we're coming." Ilara clenched her fists. The Xorth had been waiting for them. The signal had been a trap. The fleet's existence had been uncovered, and the Xorth intended to eliminate any survivors before they could reach Earth. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a race to uncover the truth before their enemies could erase it. "All hands, battle stations," Ilara commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Prepare for combat. We're going to make it to Earth, no matter what it takes." As the crew readied themselves for battle, Ilara found herself staring at the view screen, her thoughts drifting back to the long-lost fleet, their ancestors, the pioneers who had set out with high hopes, only to vanish into the unknown. What had they found out there in the cold depths of space? What secrets had they uncovered? The unknown had always been both a source of wonder and dread, and now the truth of what had happened to humanity's first explorers was about to be revealed in a way none of them could have predicted. "Captain," Mara's voice again broke the silence, but this time there was an urgency in it. "The Xorth are moving in. They're closing in on our position." Ilara stood tall, her resolve hardening. She would not let Earth's legacy die in the hands of the Xorth. There was too much at stake. The fleet, Earth's first children of the stars, had been waiting far too long. "Deploy defensive systems. We won't let them take us," Ilara said, her voice like steel. "Prepare to engage." As the Vanguard accelerated toward its unknown destiny, the crew steeled themselves for the battle that lay ahead. The war for humanity's future was about to begin, one that would reveal more than they ever expected. And the Lost Fleet was waiting. The Vanguard hurtled through the darkness of space, its engines firing with an intensity born of desperation. The Xorth fleet was closing in, a wall of advanced warships ready to end the fleeting hope that had just ignited within the crew. Ilara's fingers hovered over the command console as she issued orders, her eyes locked onto the view screen. The Xorth ships, their sleek black forms gliding like shadows, were ominously precise in their movements. "Captain, we've detected a breach in our outer shields." They're targeting our engine core. Mara's voice crackled through the intercom, the alarm blaring in the background. Ilara's heart pounded, but her face remained stoic. Engage evasive maneuvers. Full power to shields. We can't let them cripple us. Her crew responded in unison, moving with an urgency born of years of combat training. The Vanguard twisted sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding a direct hit from Exorath plasma cannon. The shockwave rattled the ship's frame, but it held steady. Ilara's mind was already racing ahead. They had to get past the Exorath blockade, or all of humanity's hopes would be dashed. Incoming transmission, Mara reported. It's from the fleet, from the lost fleet. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Could it be possible? After all these years, after so much silence, the fleet had returned? She nodded sharply, her voice quiet yet urgent. Patch it through. The screen flickered, and a grizzled face appeared on the monitor, an old man with a face weathered by years of isolation and conflict. His eyes were sharp, piercing through the years of darkness, yet there was something haunting in them, a kind of exhaustion that seemed to cling to him, even in his resolve. This is Admiral Kellandre of the Odyssey. You are not alone, Captain, he said, his voice crackling with static but unmistakably authoritative. We've been waiting for Earth's signal. We've been waiting a long time. Ilara's pulse quickened. Admiral Dre, you're alive. For now, Dre replied, but not for long. We've been trapped in the Exorath sector for centuries. They've been hunting us. We had no choice but to hide, to become ghosts in the shadows. But we knew you would come, Captain. We knew Earth would remember us, even if it took 1,000 years. The gravity of Dre's words hit Ilara with the force of a freight train. The Lost Fleet, survivors of Earth's earliest interstellar expeditions, had been caught in a war with the Exorath that no one had ever known about. They had been stranded, isolated, and forgotten by time. Until now. The Exorath had been the ones to trap them here. And now, as Earth's call reached the stars once more, the Exorath were determined to finish what they had started. The eradication of humanity's first interstellar voyagers. Admiral, we're coming to help you, Ilara said, her voice firm, though the weight of the situation threatened to crush her resolve. Where are you? How can we reach you? A shadow passed over Dre's face, and for the first time, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. We are scattered. Some of us have held onto the Odyssey, others are on other ships. We've lost so much, Captain, but we can still fight. We can still hold out as long as you get here in time. Ilara glanced at her own crew, her mind racing. The Exorath were relentless, but the fleet could still fight back. And together, they had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. They had to unite, and they had to do it quickly. Coordinates, Ilara demanded. Dre's gaze darkened. They'll be waiting for you. The Exorath have a stronghold on the planet below. But there's an old outpost, one we used to supply. It's the only place we can rendezvous without drawing attention. You'll find us there. The transmission cut off, and Ilara's heart beat faster. They were so close now. The Lost Fleet was within their reach, but the Exorath weren't going to make it easy. Set a course for the coordinates, and prepare for battle, Ilara ordered. We'll fight our way there if we have to. The crew of the Vanguard surged into action, preparing for what would be the most dangerous mission they had ever undertaken. Ilara's mind, however, was elsewhere. The Lost Fleet, her ancestors. The very people who had helped lay the groundwork for humanity's survival beyond Earth's atmosphere. They had paid a terrible price, and now it was time for their descendants to return the favor. The Vanguard angled toward the distant planet where the battle for humanity's future would begin. The Vanguard rocketed through the cold abyss of space, its hull vibrating from the intensity of the engine's thrust. The coordinates from Admiral Dre had led them to a planet on the fringe of Exorath-controlled space. It was a desolate world, a shadow in the dark, hidden among debris fields and forgotten moons. The outpost they were heading to had once been a safe haven for humanity's pioneers, a place to regroup and resupply during the long journey into the unknown. Now it was their last hope for survival. Elara stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the glowing blue orb ahead. Her mind was a storm of strategy and resolve. The Exorath were waiting. She could feel their eyes on them, even though they were still a few hours from their destination. The fleet had no illusions about what was coming. This would not be a simple rescue mission. It would be a battle for the survival of humanity's first interstellar fleet. If they couldn't get to the outpost, everything would be lost. Captain, Mara's voice broke through her thoughts. We've detected a Xorath ship on an intercept course. It's too big to be a scout. They're sending reinforcements. Elara's stomach twisted. The Exorath weren't just waiting, they were preparing for an all-out assault. How long until we're in range? 15 minutes at our current speed, Mara replied. But they'll be on us before that. They've already begun firing their long-range weapons. The view screen lit up with flashes as Xorath plasma bolts streaked through the void, their trajectory deadly accurate. The Vanguard jerked violently as the shields absorbed the impact, but the force was enough to rattle the crew. Elara gritted her teeth and adjusted the controls. Evasive maneuvers, Elara commanded, her voice unwavering despite the chaos. Full speed. Bring us within firing range of the enemy flagship. The Vanguard surged forward, a massive Exorath dreadnought now visible on the view screen. It loomed large, a terrifying amalgamation of dark steel and alien technology, bristling with weapons. The Exorath had once been the most feared race in the galaxy, and from the looks of it, they hadn't lost any of that power. The crew worked in perfect harmony, dodging fire and returning with precision shots of their own. Yet Elara knew they couldn't keep this up forever. They had to reach the outpost. There, they might stand a chance. Captain, incoming. Mara's voice crackled again, this time with urgency. The Exorath are deploying smaller ships, boarding crafts. Elara's mind raced. Boarding actions. If they boarded the Vanguard, it would be a nightmare. They couldn't allow that. Fire on their docking ports. Disable the smaller crafts before they launch. The Vanguard's weapon systems hummed to life, and a barrage of energy blasts tore into the approaching enemy ships. Some detonated instantly, their debris scattering like shattered glass, but others, nimble and persistent, kept coming. The Xorath were relentless. Shields holding at 75%, Mara reported, her fingers flying over the console. But they're pushing us hard, Captain. We need to finish this quickly. Elara's mind focused on one thing, survival. They had come too far to be stopped now. They had no choice but to fight their way through. The planet below loomed larger, and Elara ordered the crew to prepare for descent. Brace for atmospheric entry. Set a course for the outpost coordinates. As the Vanguard began its dive toward the planet, the intensity of the battle seemed to only heighten. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, plasma bolts streaking past them like falling stars. The Exorath ships were closing in, determined to stop them at any cost. All hands, brace for impact, Elara shouted, gripping the arms of her command chair as the Vanguard plummeted into the atmosphere. The ship shuddered violently as it cut through the thick clouds, the heat of re-entry causing the outer shields to flare brightly. For a moment, the bridge was filled with nothing but the roar of wind and the hum of their descent. Captain, we've lost communications with the outpost. Mara's voice came through, strained. Something's wrong. It's not responding. Elara's mind raced. What had happened to the outpost? She pushed the thought aside. They had no time to lose. Focus on the landing, Elara commanded. We're going in hot. Prepare the crew for immediate disembarkation. We fight for the outpost, no matter what's waiting down there. The Vanguard broke through the cloud cover, revealing the dark, barren world below. The surface was scared by battle and age, craters dotting the landscape like the remnants of a war long forgotten. And amidst it all, the faint outline of the outpost could be seen in the distance. half hidden by the remnants of old structures, as if it, too, had been abandoned to the ages. They had arrived, but as Elara's eyes locked onto the landing zone, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. "Prepare for landing," Elara ordered, her voice cold as steel. "This fight is far from over." The Vanguard descended, its thrusters firing with full force as it aimed for the outpost. And as the battle continued above them, Elara's heart beat with the knowledge that this was only the beginning of the real war for humanity's future. The Vanguard's engines screamed in protest as Elara guided the ship to a rough landing. The planet's surface trembled beneath the impact, and the ship's hull groaned as it settled into place, a cloud of dust and debris rising in its wake. The battle above had raged on, but now, for a moment, there was silence, an eerie stillness that seemed to hang over the barren landscape. Elara's hand gripped the arm of her chair tightly, her mind racing. "All hands, prepare for immediate disembarkation. We need to secure the outpost before the Exorith realize we're here." Mora's voice crackled through the intercom. "Captain, we're reading multiple heat signatures near the perimeter of the outpost. They're not ours." The hairs on the back of Elara's neck stood on end. The Exorith had beaten them here, and if they were waiting, then they were walking into an ambush. "Seal the exits. We don't leave until we have eyes on the enemy," Elara ordered, rising to her feet. She turned to her first officer, Lieutenant Ryan, a seasoned combat veteran who had seen his fair share of bloody confrontations. "Ryan, you're with me. We'll lead the charge." Ryan gave a sharp nod, adjusting his blaster at his side. "Understood, Captain." The rest of the crew began to move into position, securing weapons and checking their armor. Elara could hear the low hum of the ship's automated systems as they prepared to lock down the entry points. She couldn't help but wonder how much longer they had before the Exoreth sent reinforcements. "Captain, there's movement at the northern entrance," Mara reported, her voice tight with anxiety. "The Exoreth are preparing to assault the outpost. They know we've landed." Elara's gaze hardened. They couldn't afford to let the Exoreth take the initiative. If they did, this mission was over before it had even begun. "Ryan, we move out in 30 seconds. Secure the southern flank and cover our rear. Mara, you'll coordinate with the Vanguard to track any enemy reinforcements," Elara ordered. A sharp beep sounded from her console, signaling the deployment of the last of the landing pods. The crew was ready. Elara took a deep breath, trying to quell the storm of emotions swirling within her. They had come so far, too far to fail now. She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the mission. The future of humanity's deep space exploration hung in the balance. With a final glance at her crew, Elara activated the hatch, and the blast doors opened with a hiss. The harsh winds of the barren world greeted them, carrying with it the scent of metal and dust. The outpost stood just a few hundred meters away, a dark silhouette against the gray sky, its crumbling walls a testament to the years of neglect. The team moved in formation, their boots crunching over the rocky ground. The feeling of being hunted was palpable. Every step they took, every movement was measured. Elara's eyes darted over the horizon, her senses straining to detect the slightest hint of an ambush. The Exorith were patient, methodical in their tactics. They wouldn't rush in, but they would attack when it suited them. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and a massive explosion rocked the eastern wall of the outpost. The force of the blast sent a shockwave through the team, knocking them off balance. "Contact!" Ryan shouted, raising his weapon as Sorith soldiers emerged from the debris. Their sleek black armor glinted under the dim light, their alien faces emotionless as they advanced, weapons raised. Elara's instincts kicked in. "Take cover, return fire," she commanded. The Vanguard crew dove for cover behind the remnants of an old supply building, their blasters charging as they fired back at the advancing Sorith. The exchange was swift, brutal. The Exorith were relentless, their weapons disintegrating the stone and metal with each blast. But the crew fought with a fury born of desperation, their resolve unbreakable. "Keep them pinned down," Ilara shouted, firing off several rounds. A Xoreth soldier crumpled under her fire, but more kept coming. Ryan's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, we've got company. Reinforcements are coming from the north. We're surrounded." Ilara's mind raced. They were outnumbered. The Xoreth were trying to trap them here, to crush the last remnants of humanity's hope. "We have to push through," Ilara barked. "Fall back to the Vanguard's landing zone. We need to regroup." But as she looked out over the battlefield, a dark realization gripped her heart. The outpost had once been a beacon of hope, a symbol of humanity's reach into the stars. Now it was becoming a tomb, and if they didn't act fast, it would be the final resting place for their last hope. "Ryan, move!" Ilara shouted. "We're not losing this fight." With a final glance at the crumbling outpost, Ilara took off in a sprint, leading her crew back toward the Vanguard. But the Xoreth weren't giving up. They were closing in fast. The battle for humanity's future was about to reach its most dangerous moment. Ilara's pulse pounded in her ears as she led her team through the wreckage of the outpost. The sky overhead was filled with thick, swirling clouds, casting an oppressive shadow over the battlefield. Behind them, the Xoreth forces pushed forward relentlessly, their weapons cracking like thunder, tearing through the landscape and sending plumes of dust and rock into the air. The ground beneath Ilara's feet seemed to shake with every explosion, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. "Captain, they're closing in fast." Mara's voice echoed over the comms. "We can't hold them off much longer." Ilara's eyes scanned the horizon. The Vanguard's landing zone was just ahead, a few hundred meters away, but it felt like miles. The Xoreth were everywhere now, flanking from all sides, cutting off any possible escape. They were trapped, and the worst part was that they had no reinforcements coming. If they couldn't hold their ground, everything humanity had worked for would be lost. "Ryan, status report." Ilara barked, her voice tight with urgency. "Still holding, Captain," Ryan replied, his tone grim. "But I don't know how much longer we can keep pushing them back. Their numbers are overwhelming." Ilara's mind raced. The Vanguard could escape if they could just reach it, but it was too dangerous. The Xoreth knew they had nowhere to go, and they were drawing tighter around them with every passing second. A retreat was out of the question. Unless they found a way to break through, they were finished. Suddenly, a loud bang rang through the air as one of the Xoreth's smaller ships swooped low overhead, firing a barrage of plasma bolts that shattered the nearby structures. The blast sent a shockwave through the air, knocking Ilara to the ground. She gritted her teeth, pushing herself back to her feet, only to see a squadron of Xoreth soldiers advancing on their position, weapons raised. "Ilara, look out!" Ryan yelled as he dove in front of her, pushing her to the ground. A series of energy blasts missed them by inches, the heat searing through the air. "We need to move now," Ryan shouted, pulling her up and dragging her behind the remains of a collapsed tower for cover. "This is our last chance." Ilara's heart hammered in her chest. The Vanguard wasn't just their ship, it was humanity's last hope. If they didn't reach it, if they didn't escape, all of their efforts, all their sacrifices, would be for nothing. She looked back at the landing zone. The Xoreth were advancing from every direction now, and their forces were too numerous to fight off in a direct engagement. They had to think of something else, a way to even the odds, if only for a few precious moments. "Ryan, cover me. I'm going for the control tower. I have an idea." Ryan's eyes widened in surprise. "Captain, it's a suicide run. You can't." "I have no choice," Ilara snapped. "Get the others to the Vanguard. I'll be right behind you." With a determined nod, Ryan turned and signaled the rest of the crew to move toward the ship. Ilara's mind sharpened. The control tower was the key to stopping the Xoreth's assault. It had once served as the communication hub for the outpost, but it had long since fallen silent. If she could reactivate the old defense systems, maybe they could hold the Xoreth off long enough for the crew to escape. She sprinted across the open battlefield, ducking behind broken walls and debris as she approached the tower. Plasma fire lanced the ground near her feet, but she didn't hesitate. Every step felt like an eternity, but her resolve was unshakable. She was doing this for humanity, for the future of the stars. As she reached the base of the control tower, Alara quickly worked her way to the main entrance, where she found the security system still functional. She keyed in her override codes, a mixture of numbers and symbols, and after a tense moment, the doors groaned open. Inside, the air was cold and musty, the room dark except for the blinking lights of ancient consoles. The control panels were dusty, but they still held the power to change the tide of battle. Alara set to work quickly, her fingers flying across the panel. She needed to activate the automated defense systems, turrets, force fields, anything that could slow the Xoreth down. Her hands trembled as she worked, every second feeling like a lifetime. Her breath came in short gasps as the world outside seemed to fall apart. Come on, she muttered to herself, sweat beading on her forehead. She couldn't afford to waste time. The comms crackled in her ear. Captain, the Xoreth are nearly at the landing zone. We can't hold them much longer. Alara's heart pounded as the system finally came online. This is it. Stand by. A low hum filled the air as the old defense systems powered up. A force field flickered to life, surrounding the landing zone and providing a temporary shield from the incoming fire. Alara felt a surge of relief. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her team the opening they needed to make a last-ditch push for the Vanguard. Rian, go, she shouted into the comms. Now's your chance. She didn't wait to see the result. She was already back on the move, racing toward the exit. The Xoreth were closing in, but for a brief moment, the scales had tipped in humanity's favor. She knew this wasn't over, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. As she reached the landing zone, she saw her crew sprinting toward the Vanguard, the ship now fully powered and ready for departure. The battle wasn't over, but they had bought themselves the time they needed. Get to the ship, Alara shouted as she sprinted the last few meters. She didn't dare look back. The Xoreth forces were regrouping, but they were too late. The Vanguard lifted off, the thrusters roaring to life as the crew took off into the sky, leaving the shattered remains of the outpost behind. But the battle for humanity's future was far from finished. The Vanguard was only one ship, and now they had to face the wrath of the Xoreth in a way they never had before. The Vanguard broke through the planet's atmosphere, its engines firing with a force that sent vibrations shuddering through the hull. Alara gripped the command console, her knuckles white as the cold void of space stretched out before them. The battle below seemed a lifetime away, but the chaos and the weight of what had just occurred pressed heavily on her shoulders. She watched the dim outline of the now distant planet recede into the darkness. We've made it, Captain, Mara's voice came over the comms, but there was no celebration in her tone. But they're still coming. The Xoreth won't let us leave so easily. Alara nodded grimly. The Vanguard had just narrowly escaped the outpost, and while they were temporarily free from the Xoreth's immediate threat, the war was far from over. The Xoreth had now realized the stakes of this conflict. They weren't just fighting a scattered resistance. They were fighting the last hope of humanity. Raise shields, prepare for evasive maneuvers, Alara ordered, her eyes scanning the radar for any signs of pursuit. Ryan, who had taken the co-pilot seat, glanced at the tactical readout. We're clear for now, but we've got a small fleet of Xoreth warships closing in fast. They're too well coordinated. They knew we'd make a run for it. Alara's mind raced. She had anticipated a pursuit, but the Xoreth were smarter than she had given them credit for. They weren't just reacting, they were adapting. and that made them far more dangerous. We can't outrun them with our engines alone, she muttered under her breath. We need to buy time. Can we activate the ship's cloaking device? Mara, now at the sensor station, quickly checked the diagnostics. It's damaged from the blast. It'll take several minutes to reroute power and engage the cloaking. We won't have that long. Ilara clenched her jaw. They needed a miracle, and miracles were in short supply these days. Prepare the last of the long-range weapons, she said, her voice hardening with determination. We'll give them a reason to think twice before pursuing us. Ryan shot her a look, his gaze conflicted. Captain, this won't stop them. Even if we fire the last of the heavy artillery, they'll adapt. They always do. Ilara's eyes met his. She had been in this situation before, back when Earth was still struggling to hold off the first wave of the Xoreth invasion. The first few battles had been lost, and humanity had been forced to rely on anything they could think of. Desperation had led to innovation, and sometimes innovation was the only thing that could defeat an overwhelming foe. This isn't about stopping them, Ryan. It's about surviving long enough to make the jump, Ilara said, her voice filled with purpose. We don't stop fighting. We fight until the very end. With a quick nod, Ryan began inputting the necessary coordinates for their weapon systems. As the last of their long-range artillery charged, Ilara's fingers drummed nervously against the console. Each moment felt like an eternity. The Xoreth ships were still too far away to target with any accuracy, but the seconds felt like they might be their last. We've got another problem, Captain, Mara reported, her voice tense. We've picked up a massive energy signature, an anomaly, just beyond the Xoreth fleet. It's too large to be a regular ship. What kind of anomaly? Ilara asked, her voice tight with dread. It's not a ship, Captain, Mara said, her fingers flying over the sensor console. It's something else. It's emitting some sort of pulse, and it's heading straight for us. Ilara froze, her heart skipping a beat. A new threat, one they hadn't prepared for, was barreling toward them. Whatever it was much bigger than any Xoreth warship. What do you mean by pulse, Mara? She demanded. Is it a weapon? Possibly. But it's different from anything we've encountered. Mara's voice trailed off as the sensor readout flickered erratically. Wait, it's too close. We can't escape it. Before Ilara could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing her against the console. Her vision blurred for a moment as a sharp pain shot through her side, but she quickly regained her composure. The ship was under attack, but from where? Report, she shouted. We've been hit by some sort of gravitational wave, Ryan said, his voice tight with alarm. It's destabilizing the engines. If we don't fix it soon, we'll lose control. Ilara's mind raced. They were being pulled into something far beyond the Xoreth. The strange energy signature was already wreaking havoc on their systems. Can you stabilize the engines? She asked, her voice laced with urgency. We can try, but it'll take time. We need to pull out of this field, or we won't be able to escape. Ilara gritted her teeth. They were running out of options. The Vanguard was caught between a deadly foe and a mysterious force beyond their understanding. And in either direction, they were facing extinction. Full power to the engines, she ordered. Get us out of this mess. We can't afford to stay in one place for too long. As the crew scrambled to respond, Ilara's gaze shifted to the stars outside the viewport. Their last mission had been a desperate gambit to reclaim hope for humanity, but now, as an unknown threat pulled them into its gravitational grip, Ilara realized that their true challenge had only just begun. The future of humanity, the survival of their race, hung in the balance, and Ilara knew they couldn't run forever. They had to fight. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, she commanded. We're about to enter the unknown. The Vanguard groaned under the strain as the unknown force tightened its grip, dragging them deeper into the heart of the energy anomaly. The ship's engines screamed, unable to break free from the gravitational pull. Alarms blared in every corner of the bridge, and the air was thick with tension. Alara's eyes darted between the crew members, their faces a mix of fear and resolve. They were all in this together, but now the odds felt even more insurmountable than ever. Whatever was coming for them, they had no way of knowing its true intentions, but they couldn't afford to sit idle, not when humanity's fate depended on them. "We've got no way to counter this," Ryan said, his voice shaking with frustration. "The anomaly is too strong. We're locked in." Alara clenched her fists, her mind working furiously. They couldn't fight this anomaly, but perhaps they could use it. Humanity had always been resourceful, and right now, that resourcefulness was their only weapon. "Mara, scan the anomaly," Alara commanded. "Anything, any weak point, any signature that we can use to our advantage." Mara's fingers flew over the controls, her eyes scanning the chaotic readout. "It's difficult to make sense of, Captain, but there's something. A pattern in the energy pulses. It's like a field, one that's being generated from a singular point, deep inside the anomaly. If we can disrupt that, we might be able to break free." Alara's heart raced. Disrupting the field sounded like their best shot, but the odds were slim. If they failed, they would be trapped, doomed to drift endlessly into the unknown. But if they didn't try, they would die for sure. "Can we target it with our weapons?" Alara asked, her voice firm. "It's possible, but we're running out of time," Mara replied, her eyes wide with anxiety. "If we don't act now, we might be dragged into the core of the anomaly. We'll never escape." "Then we don't have a choice," Alara said. "Ryan, set course for the epicenter. We're going to use everything we have to disrupt the field." Ryan nodded, though his face was pale. "Aye, Captain. Course set. We're going to have to make this shot count." The ship lurched again as the anomaly's pull intensified, its invisible fingers tightening around them. The Vanguard was fighting against more than just the Exorath now. It was fighting against a force beyond human comprehension. Every system was pushing at its limits, and still, they were being pulled closer. "Mara, are the weapon systems ready?" Alara asked, her voice strained. "They're charging, but we need to lock onto the core of the field. If we don't, we'll waste the shot," Mara replied. The seconds stretched into eternity as the crew scrambled to prepare. The hum of the weapons charging reverberated through the ship, and Alara's pulse quickened. They were on the edge. Everything they had fought for, the lives of every human still left, the hope for the future, was riding on this moment. "We're close," Ryan said, his voice tight. "Just a little more." Suddenly, the ship jerked violently, throwing everyone off balance. A deep rumble echoed through the hull as the anomaly's gravitational force surged. The comms flickered and Alara saw the lights dim, the Vanguard systems struggling to maintain power. The anomaly was tearing at their very foundations. "Now," Alara shouted. Mara fired. A brilliant, blinding pulse of energy shot out from the Vanguard, streaking through the void toward the heart of the anomaly. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath as the pulse traveled, cutting through the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The pulse hung in the air like a solitary beacon, its trajectory locked onto the core of the anomaly. Alara watched, her heart in her throat, praying that it would be enough. Then, an explosion of light. The anomaly shimmered, twisting and distorting in a violent eruption of energy. The Vanguard shook violently as the gravitational force released its grip, throwing them back toward the relative safety of space. The crew was silent, each person holding their breath as the last of the anomaly's power dissipated into the void. "We did it," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. Alara exhaled sharply, her heart still racing. They had done it. They had broken free. But as the stars began to settle back into their familiar patterns, Alara's thoughts turned to the future. The Exorath were still out there, and the galaxy was still in chaos. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. "We're not done yet," Ilara said, her voice steady but determined. "Prepare for the jump. We have a mission to complete." As the crew went to work, Ilara stood at the helm, staring into the vast expanse of stars before them. They had faced the unknown and survived, and now it was time to face their next battle. Humanity's call had been heard, and it wasn't just a plea, it was a declaration. They would not be forgotten. They would rise, and they would fight for their place in the stars.